So, Ben Winkler.
Hello, Fresh Air Center. Hey. So I'd like to, I'll open things up in a moment, but first I'd like to welcome my two fellow panelists to the stage. I'm joined by Phil Bloomer to my far left. He's the Director of Campaigns and Policy.
Thank you.
For Oxfam Great Britain. Please reserve your booing for fossil-winning countries. Excuse me, further to my left is Tara Rowe, the Senior Policy Advisor at WWF.
Hi.
So I will be speaking for a moment about the campaigning atmosphere here in Copenhagen, and more specifically about new media and online campaigning, and the way that, in my view, at least one bright spot in all of what's happened in the last few weeks has been the way global movements on climate change have converged and come together and been supercharged by this process. We might not be winning the kind of victory we're hoping for right now, but I think there's a strong reason to hope and believe that political change is in the offing. Then I'll be handing it off to Phil to talk about his latest intelligence from what's been happening inside the Bella Center and a sense of where things might be heading. And then Tara will speak to more about the kind of scenarios that we might be looking at and how we might evaluate them. So apparently there are negotiations happening now about climate change.
Yeah, I heard about it.
So, indeed, many of us have heard about it at this point, and not just here, but there's been an incredible, intense level of interest around the world, and it's not just filtered through traditional news media and through transcription of government press releases. There's been I would guess, an order of magnitude more sources of information flowing out of what's happening here than have existed at any previous, not only climate negotiations, but any kind of international forum like this. One of the reasons for that is the space that we're in, the Fresh Air Center. If we could give a round of applause for just a moment to the folks who put this together. The Fresh Air Center has been this hub for blogging, for new media, for online campaigning. Bloggers from dozens of countries, from the Maldives, from Togo, from rich and poor nations, major outlets with huge audiences, newer voices that have grown their audiences during this time. It's a spectacular space. It's not only infinitely nicer and warmer and better connected on the internet than any of the other workspaces I know of here, but it's also, I think, has the same kind of spirit that we're seeing around the world, with people coming together and working collaboratively side by side on the right sort of stuff. I think if the climate negotiations were happening here, we'd be a lot closer to a fair, ambitious binding treaty right now. The side of the campaigning activity that I've seen the most of, one is within Avaz.org. Avaz is a global campaigning network, about 3.5 million people as of 3 days ago. Today it's about 3.8 million people. We've had this incredible explosion of kind of virality and energy, and I think we've run rapid response campaigns in 22 different countries, with people calling their leaders, flooding governments with messages and phone calls and comments. And we've been doing this in partnership with just a huge array of different groups. One quick story, I think, illustrates the way that organizations are working hand in glove in this incredibly synergistic way. Last week, all of our attention became focused on the LULUCF loophole. So this is the loophole that allows sort of double counting or non-counting of emissions from forest management. A very wonky and obscure subject for most of us. LULUCF is the worst acronym in United Nations history, which is an extremely high bar. But this issue about land use change, and forestry came up. Sweden, Finland, and Austria were the prime beneficiaries of the problem and the prime movers behind a terrible position that the EU is pushing. These aren't three countries that are normally in the sights of the global climate movement, but nonetheless, word came through. They were the Climate Action Network awarded them a Fossil of the Day award. Then the Avaz Action Factory, which is a group of youth climate activists that are here in Copenhagen, there's also a group in DC, contacted Greenpeace that had these enormous trees in Hamburg, I believe, and a Greenpeace person drove 5 hours and brought them to the Bella Center. They came inside, the youth went over to outside of the delegation offices of those countries. Massive amounts of media from those countries came out. Suddenly forests were protesting their governments right in the conference center. This was picked up in the countries themselves. Policy experts were giving quotes. Finally, the issue was getting into the papers. It was national news. Then word came through sort of political intelligence networks that France had seen what was happening and announced internally in the EU that this was no longer a technical issue, but rather a political issue, and that those countries didn't speak, Sweden specifically, didn't speak for the European Union anymore. And suddenly the fight was on. And Avaz members started calling their government. Other organizations were mounting pressure campaigns and stunts. Activists in Washington, D.C. delivered the Fossil of the Day to the Austrian embassy and posted the video on YouTube, and then it was shown on the screen outside the conference center so that all the delegates saw it as they walked into the next day's negotiations. And France then took up the cause on this issue, won a Ray of the Day from the Climate Action Network, and the issue's not solved, but actually there's been significant progress on it. And suddenly the loophole might actually be closed. And I guess that, yeah, we're seeing that kind of thing happening at tons of different levels over and over. On Saturday, there were 100,000 people marching here in Copenhagen. There were more than 3,200 events around the world, and they came together in the space of 3 weeks through online organizing, matched with offline organizing, with groups dropping their focus on branding and focusing instead on shared impact and building a movement that can transcend boundaries and transcend issue focuses and really rise to this moment. So even if our leaders don't deliver what we're asking for, I think that there's a huge number of new leaders emerging. And the determination and the momentum and the energy that comes out of this moment won't disappear no matter what the declaration is or what agreement is reached. So for me, that's the biggest source of hope of this moment. However, things are looking kind of dark. They say it's always darkest before dawn. They also say it's darkest before it's pitch black. It's not yet clear which is in effect at this moment. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Phil Bloomer.
Thanks for ending on a positive note. No, I think, first of all, a big shout out for Avaz. I think they've done a fantastic job this week, along with a huge number of other organizations who've been really extraordinary in building a movement together. And I suppose, over the last few weeks, we've all been trying to get the kind of text that will deliver a fair and a safe and a binding deal for the planet. And it feels like, in the last day, we've been on a jumbo jet. The engine's been sputtering for about 2 weeks, and in the last day, it would appear that the negotiations have gone into a howling death dive, and the pilots are asleep at the controls. So we've got a huge problem of leadership, a catastrophic failure of leadership at the moment in these talks, in terms of actually being able to pull this thing out of the dive and out of the crash. And what we need, of course, are leaders that are prepared to come up and show that moral courage. And I think, what we know is, and as Ben was explaining, is people like you as the bloggers that are going to create that irrefutable public opinion, the irrefutable public opinion that we need to be able to make this now, for all those leaders in there, an electorally dangerous issue. Because at the moment, what we've got in terms of the text is essentially a hollow text with a set of hollow promises. We've got 4 major issues perhaps on the table. We've got the issue of emissions cuts, and at the moment the draft text, and Tara can say more about this, but on mitigation it basically doesn't yet have a medium-term target of 2020. It only talks about 2050. It does say that we should keep temperatures below 2 degrees centigrade, which is a great concession from our leaders. But by saying that the emissions cuts have to be 50% by 2050, what it means is that those two things just do not coincide. So we can charm ourselves into believing, and perhaps leaders think they can charm the Bella Centre and the press into believing that with those targets we can deliver a 2 degrees centigrade. But you can't charm the climate into believing that it's got to suddenly change, even though we continue to emit massive amounts of greenhouse gases. So that's where we are, I think, on that one. Another major issue is, of course, the financing for developing countries in terms of their low carbon development and in terms of their adaptation. And there, again, we've got a set of hollow promises. First of all, they're saying we will provide $3 billion a year in fast start between 2010 and the end of 2012. That is welcome money. But when you look at it, there's no new money there. It is simply money that's going to be taken out of the aid budgets and similar that was already going to be delivered to those countries, but they're now going to describe it as fast start money. So that's not a great position if you're a country that's going to have to start making real trade-offs between a low carbon future and building schools. They should be able to start a path to a low carbon future and continue to build schools and hospitals. And then on the 2020 target of 100 billion, again, it's very important. It's a significant step forward that figure of $100 billion is now in the text. But the fact is that if you look inside that figure, there's potentially no new money in it at all. Again, they're saying that it will come from public and private finance. A lot of it, they're suggesting, therefore, will come from carbon markets and other places. That would be money that would be coming to those countries anyway. So all in all, we've got, and they're not committing to this key issue of additionality, that money has to be additional to official development assistance, to the money that should be committed to development. In terms of the process of the day, and I'll finish with this, in terms of the process of the day, essentially, I think it started sometime last night when a group of leaders got together and decided that they would begin a serious negotiation. That collapsed at about 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning, depending on who you listen to, in acrimony, where there was no agreement between the leaders, and then there was a series of people who were threatening to walk out. That was saved, and people came back into the negotiating room. There was a plenary, and then they came back into the negotiating room, and they are apparently still there in various negotiating rooms in a huge amount of conflict. We know for certain that the European Union heads of state have been meeting today, and we know for certain that there is a massive conflict at the moment with some countries wanting to move to 30%, wanting to make a game-changing move of the European Union moving to 30% emissions cuts by 2020 on a unilateral basis, and other countries who are definitely saying we mustn't do that, or we would only do that if everybody else comes in with massive emissions reductions. So there's a huge conflict going on in the European Union. There's also other conflicts going on between the United States and China. Brazil's trying to play a mediating role, but is getting increasingly frustrated, as we saw in the plenary this morning. So all in all, we've got a situation where, from Oxfam's perspective at least, we've got a good number of the developing countries having come out, 116 countries coming out saying we must stay below 1.5 degrees centigrade, coming out and saying that we must maintain the Kyoto Protocol, which is the only way we can really force the rich countries to take the emissions cuts that they need to take. So there has been some leadership, but what we do not have yet is the leadership from rich countries to actually deliver on the main promises that are necessary to seal the deal. Over to you, Tara.
Right. What did you want from me?
To, I guess, talk a little bit about scenarios, what we might be looking at, and how we might evaluate it.
Yeah. I'd rather forget what's happening right now, because it's not a happy hour. I know you're all having lovely drinks, but really it's not a happy hour. Things are really not going in the right direction right now. we started, the heads of state are here and put together a declaration, maybe more than a declaration, we're not quite sure. What the form is, which is also important, but the idea that soon after that has happened, there's been a whole lot of flurry of options coming out, various versions of what it could be in reaction to what that paper is, whatever that piece of paper might be, in whatever form, and how this could actually be taken forward, looking at various country blocks and so on and so forth. And what's happening is, I mean, it's not the number of papers that are coming out, really. It's actually what is the trend. And the trend is basically going in the wrong direction. There's been a dilution. There are very key issues here that we have to hold on to. There are very key issues that we have to gain ground on and stand on very firm ground before we leave Copenhagen, or at least know that we are not going to lose this, because this is about survival. This is first and foremost about survival. And if it is about survival, this is about a certain set of issues, like you were talking about. Is it 2 degrees? Is it 1.5? Whose survival are we talking about? Whose survival are we talking about today? What does it mean for other people who will be on the front line tomorrow? So it is supposed to be what I think President Obama managed to say this morning, is it is about collective action. But do we really mean what we say? Does that paper actually reflect what collective action is and should be? I mean, I sometimes wonder, where are the voices of the AOSIS countries in this? When I see all these papers coming out, I'm not quite sure. And don't quote me on this, because I'm really not sure where these papers are coming from, who are the authors of these papers. Is there any aspiration? Forget about commitment. Is there even an aspiration to save vulnerable communities? Do we even recognize, does the leadership of this planet actually recognize that there is an issue of survival? So in terms of looking ahead, we really have to, we can't make all these goalposts suddenly shift around. We still have the same goalposts. We will have to have those targets in place. We will have to acknowledge that we have to preserve a certain level of temperature, which means that a certain level of carbon clarity, if you like, has to be maintained. Who has to reduce what? And that doesn't mean that we're talking about, it's the developed countries, they need to do their part, blah, blah, blah. It is about what is that collective action again, and what are developing countries going to do. You've heard, I'm sure you're sick and tired of hearing this. Developing countries have already talked about, yes, we've already made our announcements, blah, 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 blah. Brazil, China, you name it, they've all said it. The problem is that you can have those on the table, you can criticize the way those targets are formulated, but what does it again mean back to collective action? When these guys actually announce their targets, does that mean, at least I thought, sitting on the sidelines, that, hey, here's a chance, now let's see what the EU says. Will they go from 20 to 30%? Will they step up and increase the financial targets? But there was no such movement. Now, you can discuss what the dynamics are and the geopolitical politics and the one-upmanship that we have to play. But, we have to ask ourselves, is climate change going to change the dynamics in which countries interact? Because that is the key issue here. We have to change. What is power today? Is power coming out of the fact that survival is an issue and we put that uppermost as a priority, and therefore the AOSIS countries are the most powerful? Because that has to be turned around on its head. We don't see that. They don't have a place at the table. So when we're looking ahead in terms of scenarios and so on, we have to ask ourselves the question, what are our assumptions here? And what are those assumptions, and what needs to change? We will have, again, here's another issue. We've done targets. I'll move you on to finance. We've been talking about finance. There are numbers floating around. Yes, 100 billion. Where is that 100 billion going to? Sorry, can somebody give me a glass of water, please? Thanks. We're talking about 100 billion and so on. Let's not get into the numbers right now. Yes, we need a level of ambition. But the issue at the end of the day is, what kind of finance do we need to get this machine going? You know, you may have heard about the fast start finance. The fast start finance right now is really focused on urgent action. It shouldn't be. It's not only about going and saving the vulnerable out there. It's about building institutions. It's about building capacity so that there is absorptive capacity to take on, to take on the 150, 190 billion, you know, depending on who you ask. So, you know, these are the elements we are looking for when we look ahead, when we are looking for what does leadership mean. If we have brought the heads of state here to this bloody cold gray city to sort this out, then this is no way of sorting it out. This is going in the wrong direction. And I'm telling you, I mean, it's you guys who have to get the word out there that this is not good enough. This is not the leadership of this planet. Then the leadership lies elsewhere. Thank you.
So we now have a little while for questions and answer. If you have a question, please do come forward. There's a microphone being positioned right here. Say your name and country you're from, or affiliation, blog, organization, etc. And ask your question. Please ask questions that end with question marks if possible.
Hi, Rob Eshelman from The Nation magazine. There were several negotiators today that had started making statements about COP16. And I'm wondering what you think needs to happen between now and Mexico in terms of shifting the debate around what can happen out of these conferences. But also just a sort of sub-question to that, is there perhaps the need for a strategic reassessment about investing so much effort in these talks? Are they perhaps fundamentally flawed? And that the climate justice movement should be looking elsewhere for answers rather than these conferences. Thank you.
Yeah, I could go ahead. I've been talking nonstop. I've had to shut up for some time.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. I mean, first of all, what needs to happen between now and COP16? It's clear that the current dynamic of the negotiations doesn't work. And it partly is because the approach of many of the people in these negotiations is exactly the same approach as they would use if they were negotiating the tariffs on fridge freezers between the United States and the European Union. What they call, we get balanced advantage and we get blood on the floor. That's to say, blood on the floor, everybody has to give something up, and balanced advantage if you stay yourselves in essentially a brinkmanship until the last minute, nothing's sorted until everything's sorted, then everybody ends up with something. That's fine if you're negotiating entirely on your own self-interest. What we're negotiating here is a shared destiny. And so we need a completely different form of negotiation to be able to do that. We need much greater levels of cooperation. So the first thing that I would say has to happen is the leaders who have failed, who apparently appear to be failing at the moment in terms of delivering a deal, need to change the culture of their delegations that they send to these negotiations. Secondly, we shouldn't have the kind of situation where everything is negotiated, nothing's agreed until everything's agreed. They've got to start banking agreements as we go through the next year. So there's got to be environmental ministers' meetings at least 2 or 3 times next year before the end to make sure that those environment ministers come and they bank deals, and then they move on to the next question. So they remove, and there's a target, say, of removing, you cannot, the environment ministers come with their sleeping bags and they cannot leave the negotiations until they've removed 75% of the square brackets in this article. And that way they're forced to make come to those agreements. I think the bigger question that you raised, though, is an important one, and I'll be brief on it. Are these negotiations the right way to go? As an eternal optimist, I have to say that we have to get that multilateral cooperation. We have to get that collective action and collective leadership that Tara spoke about. But we also, I think, need to think now as a movement whether we need other forms of pressure. And, you know, maybe this is the time to start getting the lawyers out pro bono to start taking some big cases that are going to make this an extraordinarily costly failure to the rich nations if they don't deliver. And maybe we need, just as we did with asbestos and we did with tobacco, maybe we need that kind of approach where actually there's a massive threat to the banks of these countries, because it seems that those countries care more about their banks than they do, certainly about the small island states, but equally perhaps about our own shared destiny.
I'd like to speak to that for a moment as well. Climate change is an issue we can only solve all together, and some kind of global negotiation, some kind of global binding agreement between governments is the only way that we can achieve the kind of simultaneous, significant action that we need. But in terms of where, as campaigners or activists or concerned citizens, we put our focus, we lose if we only focus on this during the 2 weeks or if we only focus on what happens in negotiations. Because the reality is that the most important decisions are all political and not technical. They're not diplomatic decisions about language. They're fundamental economic choices and social choices that countries make. And you know, there's a couple of things that come out of that. One is focusing on transforming the politics of the countries that need to change the most. The leaders here are working on the basis of what they perceive to be their political reality and the space they have for their own political survival. And that's something that is determined, you know, in the US, state by state, in province by province, riding by riding. The other thing is focusing on corporate power, which is the aspect of these talks that's always invisible in the negotiating rooms. But if you look at the US position right now, it's essentially being dictated by the coal and oil lobby and their power to restrict the ambition level of United States cuts in carbon emissions. And the way to change the US negotiating position in Copenhagen is not so much to pressure Todd Stern as to remove the political clout of coal companies in states like Nebraska and, you know, wherever in the United States. If West Virginia were not essentially using its Senate votes to protect the coal industry, we'd have a different target for mitigation here in Copenhagen. And you know, I think that the escalation of peaceful direct action, the widening of the focus to many actors who are involved in this process is a fruitful and an important one. And I think that's one of the critical things that needs to change before COP15, that the decisions that are made at home based on the power politics in each of these countries ultimately is the deciding factor in what can come out of a negotiation process.
Hello, my name is Jamie Montgomery Baker. I'm the Wisconsin State Director for the League of Young Voters Education Fund in the United States. And so you all have been talking a lot about fundamental change and addressing the issue, the core issue, social and not just political. What I haven't heard in a lot of the conversations is our issues around consumption and waste. And so I'd really like for you all to kind of address that and you know, from a solution base, or, you know, why is that not part of the conversation?
You want me to go? Yeah, interesting question. I think let's be clear about this. Where does this whole problem of climate change come from? You know, a lot of you must have heard about what's my footprint, what's my country's footprint, what does that mean? How does that have an impact? It's the impact of our footprint that we are suffering now. That's the bottom line. So somewhere we are in a closed loop here. Now that can be a positive loop or it can be a negative one. And I think right now we seem to be experiencing the negative one, as you might have noticed. But the idea is that how do you actually change this around? This whole issue around well-being happiness. You know, you must have heard all these words. What do they actually mean? Have we unpacked them in terms of the time we live in? The fact that we look at, in terms of, if you like, prosperity, do we look at it just in terms of GDP? Do we look at that, you know, how do we measure things? So, I mean, I'm not sure I can answer your question totally, but these are the issues where it's not just us, it's how do governments start reassessing, reanalyzing, putting on another set of glasses to look at what is development. Is development growth? And then what is growth? And is growth then linked to well-being? And what does that mean? And what does that relationship mean? Does it mean that you have to be expansionist and therefore you know, it's a zero-sum game? What I gain, you lose, or what I gain, then nature loses. So, you know, I mean, these are the issues, and this is something that you know, is hopefully somewhere reflected in the negotiating text we handle. If we are talking about long-term low-carbon plans, or zero emission plans, it somewhere has to start addressing these things, and it has to become really real on the ground. So I hope that somewhere begins to answer your question.
Thank you. We have time for one more question and then some closing thoughts from the panelists.
Hi, my name is Evelina, and I'm from California, the North Bay Institute of Green Technology, and we're actually taking on the privatized industrial prison system that's taking people of color and putting them into prison as an alternative to giving them the social services that they need, and we're training them for green jobs. But my question is this, seeing as that this inactivity could be very much an act of genocide against these very small islands that will probably be disappearing. One of the things I heard and read in one of the many blogs is it was interesting that that big globe in the main center that was black and white had no islands on it, as if they were going to be disappeared anyways. I'm wondering what you consider as a declaration of war on these powerful nations as an alternative for these small islands that are essentially going to be taking on and having their cultures wiped out. Would that have any effect? Granted, declaring war against the United States and being an island like Sri Lanka is probably laughable, but I'm just wondering if something like that, when your entire community is being threatened with being wiped off the face of the earth, as that globe showed symbolically, that there are no islands left. What do you think about a declaration of war against the United States, Canada, and the states that are blocking this very important work?
Yeah. I think you're right that the scale of the threat is equivalent to a massive war that's going to be raging for the next century. If we don't, essentially, we're trying to negotiate a peace treaty here. I think that's right. I think as a tactic, the thing that's different about climate change to other types of threats is that, in a sense, it's an internal transformation that everyone has to undergo at the same time. And one of the most powerful things for me in seeing the evolution of the climate justice movement and the broader climate movement is the moral force of islands not only speaking to their own survival, but also stepping forward as symbols of the survival of humanity, and the way that islands have rallied people in the richest nations in the world and also other vulnerable nations around the world to their side. The Maldives is handing out passports to people so they can be honorary citizens of the Maldives here. There are organizations, including mine, that have raised money from our members to support island negotiating teams to do different things. The 350 Day of Action on October 24th, with more than 5,000 events around the world, had at its heart this message of solidarity with the island states. And in a sense, island states are the South Africa under apartheid of our time now, that their cause is all of ours. It's a symbol for the struggles that all of us are facing in our own communities and around the world. So to me, it's that spirit of solidarity and of a global movement that sees in their threat the same challenge and the same purpose that we can all rise to. It's almost more of a I think in the face of the threat of war, it's almost like a nonviolent solidarity movement that needs to arise. But I think it needs to have that same intensity and fervor that independence movements and others have had in history that have changed the world. So I guess with that, closing thoughts from my fellow panelists, that was probably my closing thought.
Yeah, well, I certainly agree with that, and I think that the critical thing there is that we do have to get that cooperation. But I think we also, in terms of the declaration of war, we need to look at other ways than war. But we need conflict. That's to say, we need non-violent conflict. There is an enormous amount of confrontation that is necessary. And that's unfortunate for people like me who love to be liked. But the fact is, we are in very difficult situations, and I've been screamed down the phone at by various delegations today for what Oxfam's been doing, as I'm sure that people here have. But that's part of the confrontation that has to go on. But I don't think that needs to that shouldn't become a violent conflict. But I also think we need to use international humanitarian law that's supposed to protect people against genocide. And I think that is another area that we need to investigate in terms of another tool or another weapon in our non-violent armory. Just to finish, I'd say, you know, first of all, I am hopeful in the medium term. The political cycle, and it's the political evolution of the world, is way behind the movement that you are generating, that we are generating together. It's also, unfortunately, behind the climate evolution. And we need desperately to get the political cycle up to the pace of the ecological cycle. I do think Ben was right to raise this issue of vested interest, because one of the reasons why the political cycle is so far behind is because the rich countries are captured in their public policy making process by massive vested interests. And those massive vested interests who pay campaigns, funds, who threaten and cajole and bully about the loss of jobs, about the loss of industry, about going to another country, they have to be confronted, and they have to be confronted rapidly. And if, as I said when I was last here, if you want to know what's happening over the next year, follow the money, because the money is where the power is, unfortunately, in this world. The last thing I'd just say is, I am hopeful because we have a movement, and this movement is growing massively and has grown massively over the next 2 years, and we have the opportunity, if we can go forward with courage together, to keep this movement growing at an exponential rate. And that's what it has to be. And it has to express that solidarity, a solidarity which is built on an empathy and an imagination of what other people are facing, such as what was just described in terms of the small island states. But it also is an extraordinary evolution of our human minds, because it has to be empathy about the key voices that are not present in this negotiation. The voices of the poor and the vulnerable, who are the first and worst affected. The voices of those most vulnerable to genocide in terms of the small island states, but also an empathy and imagination towards the next generation. And that's not something that the human race has been terribly good at up till now. But that is the evolution of human thought that we're going to have to achieve. And that's our job. As this movement, it's our job to generate that sense of forward, that sense of solidarity, and that sense of action together to confront those who would thwart a prosperous and secure future for all of us.
I believe in multilateralism, and I want to continue believing in it. I know that this week hasn't been great in terms of how multilateralism can work, but I want to believe that we can get back in there, and that it can be up and alive and kicking, and that we can create something that is of richness and of diversity. And somewhere, the whole issue around survival is around preserving that diversity, having respect for the diversity we have, of thriving on that diversity. And all these processes really, you know, the fact that we have a phenomenon like this, that we are challenged by, the fact there are communities out there that are on the brink of survival, the fact that we have to sit here and actually deliberate as to how are we going to preserve our planet is what is key to this. And I think that's why this community, civil society, and the way it has to play a role is so important. Because what we represent is the grassroots level. We bring a representation to the table that is so important to keep that reality check. And this is something that we must never lose. We must never lose it in our generation, and we must certainly make sure that this will never happen for our children. Because this phenomenon is not going to go away. We will have to teach our children and their children how to cope with it and how to actually, more than survive, to thrive on it. This challenge has to become an opportunity for all. It cannot become the opportunity for a few. And we will have to have the resources to do that. And this process will have to have the solution for that, at least the basic framework. It's the people who are going to be creative in that framework to make it work in terms of their survival and beyond. And I think that when we step forward, I mean, I have kids. I have a 16-year-old and a 9-year-old. And my greatest fear is when I'm sitting in my wheelchair somewhere and my son turns around to me and says that, you know, you knew it all and you did nothing. I think, you know, that is the scariest thought that I can have as a parent, as a citizen of the world today, is that we can't let this happen. And whatever happens in this process, yes, we'll add value to it. But as Ben said, you know, it doesn't stop there. We have so much more to do, and we must understand the power in all of us, as individuals and as the collective, as to what we need to do to get out there and get the word out there and get an understanding of whether it's consumption, whether it's climate change, how we respond, what is well-being about, what is happiness about. I mean, I think it's really important that we actually look at what can human resilience look like. And this is what it is about. At the end of the day, yes, we'll get a framework out of this negotiation. At the end of the day, it's left to us as to how we are going to interpret this in terms of creating that new resilience. And I urge you and I invite you to take this on as something, as individuals, as citizens of this planet, to take it forward as what are we going to invent as human resilience from here forward. Thank you.
One note in closing about these 2 weeks. On the first day of negotiations, a young woman named Leah from Fiji presented a petition of 10 million people from every country in the world to Ivo de Boer and to the Danish chair of the talks, to Connie Hedegaard. And that represented this collection of signatures on this sort of global petition for a fair, ambitious, and binding treaty that the Tick, Tick, Tick campaign has collected from more than 200 civil society groups. Right now, as we sit here, that petition is verging on 15 million people around the world.
Yes.
And on Wednesday, a group of young people, as civil society was being steadily removed from the talks, a group of young people sat down in the middle of the Bella Center and started very peacefully, solemnly reading names from that petition. There were 20-something of them. Security took a few away. Those remaining posted on their blog, you know, if they take us away, it'll take longer to get through all 11 million names, which is where they were at the time. John Kerry came by and thanked each of them personally. The chair of the AOSIS countries, Decima Williams from Grenada, came up and told them that she, in 1995, had sat in for 8 days in the same place during the World Summit on Sustainable Development. And sitting in with her was Wangari Maathai and other leaders who've gone on to change the world. And she said, choosing a cause and sticking with it for your life transforms you and it transforms the world. They were bringing all of our voices into that place and inspiring these negotiators and also challenging all of us to live up to our ideals. And I think that transformation even if it's not happening at the political level right now, is happening in the movement level and in each of us. So there's something to hold on to here.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, guys.